First of all, I'd just like to thank everyone for coming. It's good to see this many people. My name is Dillon, and this is Sam, and we are both staff members of Deep Green Resistance, and we're here to talk to you a little bit about our strategy and some of our analysis. We do have a table out on the main thoroughfare, so if you are interested in what you hear, want to learn more, someone should be out there afterwards. So we hope you enjoy. We'd also like to thank the organizers of PIELC.
Could you talk a little louder, please?
Sure. Thank you. So, first of all, I want to talk a little bit about why we're here and why we're part of Deep Green Resistance. This book, Silent Spring, written by Rachel Carson and published in 1962, is generally credited with being the kickoff point of the modern environmental movement. What this means is that there's been a modern environmental movement in this country for over 50 years. Over half a century of modern environmentalism. And yet every living system on the planet is in decline. And the rate of decline is accelerating, and there has not been a single peer-reviewed scientific article that's been published in the past 30 years that contradicts that statement. With each day that passes, the world is in worse shape. Migratory songbird populations are collapsing, fish populations are collapsing, mollusk populations, amphibian populations, insect populations. 55,000 is the average number of species, of entire species, that we are losing every year. And when is the last time we saw a scientific report that said climatologists have overestimated the trajectory of climate change? When's the last time we heard about an international climate conference that was anything other than a complete failure in altering that trajectory? Climate change is continuing on its course, the Earth descending into a bone-wrenching fever, and scientists are continually surprised by the discovery of unforeseen feedback loops or some new piece of evidence that turns what used to be the worst case and extreme prediction into the more conservative. The Global Humanitarian Forum recently put out a prediction that by 2030, 100 million people could be dying as a direct result of climate change. And that's based on how many are currently dying, which is about 300,000. And in January, I came across a Cornell research survey that found that water, air, and soil pollution account for 40% of human deaths worldwide. 40%. That is a staggering number. So if the modern environmental movement's failure to address climate change and other forms of ecological destruction isn't an indication that we desperately need some new strategy, then what is? In all seriousness, when is it that we will admit to ourselves that we are actually living in the midst of nothing short of apocalypse? More than 90% of the large fish in the ocean are gone. 97% of the world's native forests are gone. 98% of the world's native grasslands are gone. Do we wait until these numbers are reached 100%? When do we declare a state of emergency and then act accordingly? Almost every river in the world has been dammed or diverted. Entire mountaintops are still being blown off. Pit mines are still being ripped open. And Mordor of the North, also known as the Alberta tar sands, is a beast that never sleeps. Our question is, what is your threshold for fighting back?
Yeah.
Every day we wake up to a world with sweatshops, rampant poverty, starvation, slavery, wage economies that make slaves of us all, an entire culture of rape and sexual assault, and of course the increasing rates of cancer, diabetes, anxiety, depression, suicide, and so on. Any way you want to slice it, this culture we're living in is sick, and it's making the Earth sick. And you can see it whether you're looking at the satellite images that show the planet's surface being covered by less and less forest and more concrete, or from our perspective here on the ground as we watch ourselves and those around us being poisoned or driven insane. The understanding that the Earth is sick is pretty much our central understanding as Deep Green Resistance. And the direction we've chosen is based on the knowledge that if we don't do everything we can to stop the spreading of this disease-like culture, it's highly possible that this planet could be rendered uninhabitable for most, if not all, forms of life. If our own bodies, which have been patterned by the Earth itself, can get sick and die, we think it is a mistake to assume that that is impossible for the Earth. which is why we were hesitant to accept the tagline of this year's PIELC conference, "The Earth is too big to fail." We're not so sure that's the case, and we're not willing to take that risk. So with that, Sam's going to jump into a bit of our analysis.
So, as members of Deep Green Resistance, we oftentimes refer to ourselves as radicals. Unfortunately, in today's political climate, that term has become pretty stigmatized and convoluted. So I want to kind of redefine that term based off of the etymology of the word. So if we look at that etymology, then we'll find that it comes from the Latin word radix, which means root. So when we describe ourselves as radicals, what we actually mean is that we're trying to get to the root of the issues that we now face today, or address the fundamental cause of all of these problems. So this chart does a really good job of contrasting radicals with the other side of the political left, liberals. And the reason why I think it's important to do this is because the vast majority of contemporary activism and contemporary ideas have been pushed by this liberal ideology. And I think that's why, we think that's why a lot of our activism, contemporary activism, has failed. So looking at this chart, the first major difference here between liberals and radicals is in their conception of the basic unit of society. So on the one side, liberals believe that society is made up of individuals who are mostly autonomous and self-willed and wholly unique. And so therefore, a lot of activism, a lot of liberal activism is focused on changing individual minds and changing individual actions, or convincing each of us that we need to change our own minds to change the world. So one thing that kind of came out of this is the Go Green movement, which stresses green consumer choices and personal lifestyle changes. So on the radical side of the spectrum, we understand that society is actually made up of classes, groups, or castes. And for radicals, we want to make common cause with others who share our condition. That's the first step towards creating a political consciousness and having effective political action. So our activism as radicals is focused on making common cause with others and targeting institutions, because we know that it's not individuals who are doing the destruction, it's systems. So the second major difference here between liberals and radicals is about the question of the nature of social reality. So in this realm, liberalism is pretty idealist. It believes that social reality, or reality, is mostly constituted of ideas or concepts. And so, again, a lot of liberal activism then is focused on changing minds or people's perceptions of the world. And so people spend a lot of time trying to convince people to remove hate from their hearts, or to just internalize that climate change is a real thing, thinking that if enough minds are changed, then that will be enough to alter the current trajectory. So radicals fall on the side of materialism here. We recognize that society is organized by concrete systems of power, not just thoughts and ideas. So these concrete systems of power actually give birth to thoughts and ideas. Those are the fundamental structures. So in other words, there are physical institutions with names and addresses that are doing the destruction here. And so if we want to address the current environmental crisis, we have to target those institutions, not just our mindsets about them. Changing our minds isn't going to stop the destruction. So without this solid analysis of the materialism of social reality, liberals oftentimes fall into the trap of naturalism or voluntarism. Basically what this means is that if you can't see the physical barriers that are keeping the marginalized classes in their place, then oppression can just look like it's natural or voluntary. So a really good example is from Marilyn Fry, and she talks about a bird cage, a bird in the cage. And so if you can't see the physical bars that are keeping the bird in the cage, then you might ask, well, why is that bird staying in there? And you might say, well, maybe it's just naturally in that cage. Maybe that species of bird is just born into cages and lives its life that way. And if not that, then maybe it's voluntarily there. Maybe it likes it there. Maybe it wants to be there. So for liberals who can't see that oppression carries material restraints, from a greater difficulty getting a job, to a harder time earning a living wage, to actually the threat of physical violence in your life, then they might consider oppressed classes as either naturally subordinate or voluntarily so. And we can see the sentiment playing out in the good old American pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality, which is often used as a tool against the poor and destitute to tell them that they just need to try a little harder and they can raise above their circumstances. And the same mentality is used in the victim blaming, which is often the response to the victims of rape and sexual assault. When people say, you shouldn't have been dressing like that, or you might have been asking for it. So as radicals, we know that these are all just justifications for oppression. And we realize that oppression is not natural, and it's certainly not voluntary, but it's the result of an unjust political arrangement of power which we think can be changed. So the final major difference here between liberals and radicals is in their approaches to justice. On the liberal side, social justice activism is often focused on abstract principles or ideals. And the logical conclusion of this is that once again, material circumstances are erased in exchange for a loyalty to these abstract ideals. And this, we can see this at work when hate groups are allowed to organize legally under the banner of freedom of speech, which somehow outweighs the material effects of what these hate groups do to real humans. And we can see the same thing happening when porn, which brutalizes women, is allowed to actively be on the internet because it is under the banner of freedom of expression or an ultimate fear of censorship under the capitalist system, which again somehow outweighs the material effects of eroticizing violence against women. So as radicals, we know that instituting abstract moral principles without consideration for material circumstances is a tactic which only works in the interest of those in power. And we'd rather see material equality and a real redistribution of power. So our basic point here today is that the vast majority of contemporary activism has fallen under this liberal banner, which is why I think that we're losing today. But when we think about tactics, it's important to note that no tactic is definitively liberal or radical unto itself. What makes a tactic liberal or radical is how it's used and if it's tied into a larger strategy or a larger resistance movement. So tactics can oftentimes overlap in ways that are really crucial and essential, but the best kind of resistance movement functions when tactics aren't just working for themselves, when they're bolstering each other. So this chart describes the basic structure of any effective campaign or resistance movement. And in any functioning campaign or resistance movement, you have three categories that tactics can fall into if they're going to be radical, if they're going to support each other. And the first one here is sustaining. So sustaining tactics directly assist or support those who are carrying out decisive actions. So those are things like prisoner support, safe houses, material support like raising money and raising food for active resistors. And then we have shaping operations, which are more indirect. They just help create the conditions necessary for success. So these would be more things like education, propaganda, or just generally trying to build an oppositional culture that's ripe for resistance. And so, for instance, one of our functions as DGR, as an above-ground organization, is to contribute to a culture that supports or normalizes resistance in the name of environmental or social justice. So that's a shaping action. And so finally, we have decisive actions, which are pretty self-explanatory. Those are the actions which directly accomplish an objective at hand. And so these could be anything like effective legislation, to community building and defense, to sabotage. And basically where a tactic falls depends on the strategic goal at hand. So if my strategic goal is to be self-sufficient, then planting a garden would be a decisive tactic, right? Because that's achieving my goal directly. But if my strategic goal is to stop the destruction of the living earth, which means stopping industrial infrastructure, then planting a garden is more like a sustaining action. It would create food for resistors. So it's all about what our goal is here and thinking about our tactics in terms of those goals. So now we're going to look at some specific examples of tactics that have been used in the environmental movement. And we're going to try and keep in mind that liberal radical analysis because we're going to see how a lot of those tactics have been used in pretty liberal ways, but also try and create a pathway or a strategy for how they can be used in more radical ways in the future. So the first one we're going to talk about is lifestyle choices, and this has been a really big thing in the contemporary environmental movement. And in its most popular form, lifestyle choices have come in the form of individual lifestyle choices, or mostly individual-centric. So I talked a little bit about that with the liberal radical analysis. But the most prominent brand of personal lifestyle choice activism is consumer choice-based. So do any of these look familiar to people? Thought so. This green consumer movement has hijacked a measurable chunk of contemporary activism. And it's basically redirected all of our energy from making real change to buying green products like post-consumer toilet paper or hemp bags or something. But in less noticeably ridiculous personal lifestyle choice activism, individuals are encouraged to bring down their personal carbon footprints and make that really the focal point of their activism. So under this banner, we see tactics like taking shorter showers, consuming less, wasting less, riding bicycles, and gardening. And the idea here basically is to cleanse oneself of participation in the ongoing violence that is this culture, and to somehow wield political change in doing that. And the logical conclusion of this kind of personal lifestyle choice activism is withdrawal, or the complete removal of oneself from an oppressive system. So I think it's important to say that there's nothing wrong with trying to live more simply or with less of an impact. In fact, the impulse to not participate in this ongoing destruction is quite noble, and it's absolutely commendable. Personally, in my personal life, I ride my bicycle as much as I can, I recycle, I waste as little as I can. But I know that as I do these things, destruction continues to happen on an industrial scale every single day. So there are a few big fallacies that are perpetuated by this personal lifestyle choice movement that I think are worth addressing. The first one is that personal sustainability will become a mass movement. So, as Dillon said, the current environmental movement has been around for roughly half a century now, and we still have yet to see a majority of recyclers, let alone a majority of people who are willing to drastically alter their lives to become more sustainable. So in other words, this kind of mass environmental movement that many people are pushing for is completely unprecedented. And how long are we going to wait for that to happen? The second major fallacy here is kind of built off the first one. So if personal sustainability did become a mass movement, then it would result in a sustainable society. So the big thing here is that it's not the products of industrial production which are the central problem here. It's the industrial production process itself. There is no such thing as sustainable industry. So consider this, if you think there is. The biggest polluter in the city of Portland is this company called Sapa, which is an aluminum production company which mainly focuses on the production of bicycles. So while one bicycle may seem like a revolution, the industrial production of thousands of bicycles looks more like 995,962 pounds of sulfuric acid pouring into the air. Not exactly revolutionary. So in the same vein, a lot of people who tout green consumer choices put a lot of faith in this green energy solutions or alternatives to fossil fuels. And I think that calling these things green is irresponsible. What many people who push for solar panels, wind turbines, geothermal, or the vast array of other solutions don't talk about is that clean energy requires the industrial extraction of rare earth metals, and industrial manufacturing infrastructure, and industrial transportation infrastructure. Not to mention, these green energy solutions are inconsistent and unpredictable, and so require the maintenance of fossil fuel-based plants to back them up. So given these facts, it should probably suffice to say that the so-called green solutions are neither green nor are they true solutions. But if you don't believe me, maybe you could ask the researchers from Bangor University, who recently found that the creation of oil palm plantations for biofuel are actually releasing prehistoric supplies of carbon dioxide and inadvertently accelerating the rate of climate change. Or maybe you could ask the indigenous people in Mexico who are protesting the development of wind farms, which will destroy the aquatic habitat that they depend on for survival. And then there's the people of Bauchi, Mongolia, whose crops are failing because of the radioactive pollution seeping out of tailing ponds by factories which produce the rare earth metals necessary for solar panels and electric cars. And then, of course, there's the Carioca Declaration, signed by 500 indigenous people in Brazil, exposing the so-called green economy as unsustainable and declaring resistance to it. So my point here is that we have to realize that there is no clean, green way to maintaining this way of life. If we want future generations to live on a living planet, we are going to have to drastically change the fundamental structure of this society. So the third, and I'm sure not the final fallacy that's perpetuated by the personal lifestyle choice movement, is that individuals are primarily responsible for the destruction happening to this planet. So if we remember the liberal radical chart, then maybe we'll remember that thinking that individuals are the main focal point of social change falls pretty squarely on the liberal side. As radicals, we know that destruction isn't just like a pastime taken up by individuals, but it's institutionalized. This is something that's systemic. So the attention to the individual over these institutions is a misplacement of blame from those who are truly responsible to you and I. And if you think that changing our own lives is going to fix these systemic problems, then I ask you to consider these facts. More than 90% of the water used by humans is used by agriculture and industry. Yeah. Individual consumption is never more than a quarter of total consumption. And municipal waste, or waste produced by individuals and small businesses, accounts for only 3% of the total waste produced by the United States. So given these facts, it should be pretty clear that we can't solve the current water crisis by taking shorter showers. And we can't meaningfully reduce waste output by riding bicycles or recycling. And even if everyone participates in this, which is something that we don't expect to happen, we are not going to make a dent in the kinds of problems that we now face. So it should suffice to say that the logic behind personal lifestyle choices has a bit more holes than Swiss cheese, but not all lifestyle activism is ineffective. the main difference between effective lifestyle activism and ineffective lifestyle activism is if lifestyle activism is seen as a strategy taken up by individuals, or if it's a strategy taken up by groups who can wield their power to make political change. So while individual lifestyle choices are absolutely liberal, lifestyle changes can become radical if they're a tool, used as a tool taken up by communities for targeting specific economic, political, and social institutions. Yeah. So a really good example of effective withdrawal tactics or effective lifestyle choice tactics is in the American Revolution, believe it or not. So in the American Revolution, colonists' strategy included economic withdrawal, so boycotting things like tea to wool, political withdrawal in the form of building colonial court systems and state and colony-wide governance, and on a different level, they withdrew their allegiances from the British Crown and put it in other fellow American resistors. So all of these different kinds of lifestyle choice withdrawals came together in a culture of resistance that actually won. And withdrawalist communities, or communities that live off the map or outside of normal society's grip, can also be radical if they support resistors who are engaged in more direct forms of resistance. So this is a picture of the Zapatista movement. They had a withdrawalist community. They were food self-sufficient. They had their own schools. This was radical withdrawal at its best. And then there's also the Quakers, who have historically used their withdrawalist communities to house active resistors like the abolitionists. So the moral of the story with lifestyle activism here, fundamentally, is that we need to stop acting like individual resistors and start acting like a resistance movement.
Yeah. Yeah.